Hi. Wow, everyone is so energetic. It feels so nice to be here. All right. So, my talk is Consume GraphQL API with Apollo Client and React. Before we start, how many of you use GraphQL here? Can you please raise your hands? Well, awesome. Let's start with it. So, I am Nidhi. I'm a senior JavaScript engineer in Consensus at MetaMask team. You can find me using my Twitter handle, or we'll talk about the code. So you can find the code in my GitHub. Before we start, let me walk you through the agenda of my talk. First, we'll take a look at what GraphQL is, Apollo client, then set up our front end in Apollo client. Like Stefano mentioned, I'm going to be doing some live coding as well. Then we'll write some write some queries, and then mutate the data. Moving ahead, so as per the official documentation of GraphQL, it's a query language for APIs and a runtime for fulfilling those queries with your existing data. Well, but we had APIs before GraphQL. So why GraphQL came into the picture? So the main issue that GraphQL resolved was data overfetching and underfetching. Before GraphQL happened, we had APIs, and with that, we had to make multiple calls while making some of the data, getting some of the data that we wanted. So just to make it understand a bit better, I have a link here, and I have two buttons. Well, I don't see why my CSS is not rendering there, but I have these two buttons. The first one is a REST API button and the GraphQL API button. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna make a call to the Swappy website, Swappy API, the Star Wars API, and I'm gonna render the list of all the characters which were in the Luke Skywalker movie. So if I make a call with the REST API and I make a call with the GraphQL API, my GraphQL API renders all the characters in just 602 milliseconds, and my REST API is still figuring. I have written the function over there. And let me show my network tab here and the REST API. So in my network tab, you could see there, all my data was rendered in 4 milliseconds, and this is what my data looks like. Is it visible? So this is what my data looks like, and all the characters are listed. But with the REST API, for the same task, it took me 4 seconds, and there were multiple API calls. And in fact, the best part about using GraphQL is that you can limit the data that you want to render. For example, in my query, I only wanted to render the name of the character, so my names are displayed here. But with the REST API, when I wanted to render the characters, their details came as well. For example, the name, height, mass, but I didn't want that. But I had to make the API call because that's how my API was structured. So this is the main difference between using a GraphQL and a REST API. Well, you already took a look. Now, what GraphQL is not? GraphQL is not a query language for database. It's not a client-side state management solution, a solution for binary streams where you are streaming data, watching a video, limited to a database schema, not exclusive to JavaScript. So these all things GraphQL is not. Apollo client. Well, since I already mentioned in my previous slide that GraphQL is not a client-side state management solution, we have Apollo client. It's a state management library to manage both local and remote data with GraphQL. And it leverages the GraphQL API ability to handle the data. Why Apollo client? So declarative data fetching. First of all, not just you can fetch the data and use it. Apollo client comes with loading state encapsulated inside it. So you can check your loading state, error state. It has smart caching. You don't have to make multiple API calls again and again. It caches the data for you. It has vibrant ecosystem. It's framework. It's not just framework oriented. You can use it with React or other frameworks, and it has a very wide community support. So we have an image over here. When we want to make a GraphQL query, what we do, we write a query in our React API. From the React API, we make the query, we send the query to Apollo client. We don't send it directly to the GraphQL. Instead, we send it to the Apollo client, and from Apollo client, those queries are sent to the GraphQL server, and from there, we get a response to Apollo client, and it make it UI compatible, and then we get it in our React application. Now, let's code it. So what we are going to do today, we will create an application. I'm going to use an open API, a Northwind API. And in that API, what we will do, we have a list of products here. We'll render the list of the products. We'll make a query to render all of that. Then after that, we are going to mutate the data. So mutations will be that we are going to add another product that we want using use mutations. And same goes for updating a product, or we'll see how we can render one single product data using just one query. All right. My setup is, I'm going to use a Next application that I have already installed and other installation steps. So to begin with installations, first thing we need is the Apollo client packages. Apollo client packages we can install with NPM. I have used an NPM actually. You can do it with Yarn as well. It's a bit faster. So either we can use NPM or you can use it with Yarn. And here we are installing two packages. First is Apollo client. The other one is GraphQL. With Apollo client, this package actually contains everything that we need from the Apollo client to get the data, and GraphQL, which is a package logic, the package that provides logic for passing all the GraphQL queries. Now, initializing Apollo client. Before that, let's take a look at the code structure. So as I mentioned, I have already installed my Next app. So my products folder structure would be, I have a client directory here in which I have already added my Apollo client, like where I'm gonna make a query. And then I have my schema. I have my query where I have added all the queries that we are going to write today. And then in the pages directory, we have all the pages that we are going to render. So once we are done with the installations, we have to initialize Apollo client. To initialize Apollo client, we need to create a client. My client is created in the client directory here. And as I mentioned, I'm going to use an open API. So this is the open API I'm going to use here. This is GraphQL compose heroku.com/Northwind. This is the API I'm going to use today. The UI on the screen is GraphQL. It's the official ID for GraphQL. This version that we are seeing on the screen, it's the older one. The current one looks something like this. This is the Star Wars one. But we are not going to use it. We will see the Northwind one. So this is the one that we are going to deal with. Then to create a client, we have we pass two parameters there. First one is the URI, where we actually add the URL, and the cache, which comes with in-memory cache already encapsulated over there, and we have to import these two from the Apollo client. Once we are done with this step, next thing comes is creating your Apollo client to the product. Sorry, I'm just being faster than I could think of. So we have to wrap our app in the Apollo provider, which is nothing more like a context hook here, where I have wrapped my product, where I have wrapped my app. So I have wrapped this component here inside the Apollo provider and pass the client that we just created as a prop over here. After this step, we have to write our queries. So what queries are? When we want to, what we want to render through the API, through the GraphQL API, that we can render through queries. GraphQL queries can traverse related objects and their fields, letting clients fetch lots of related data in one request. To understand it better, let's take a look at this graphical interface here, and we'll write our first query. So, is my screen visible? This thing is visible, right? The docs are visible to everyone? It's visible? All right. So in the docs, here you can see we have mutations and we have viewer. I want to make a query, and these are the docs that tells us like what is the structure of our GraphQL query should be. So I'm going to make a query to the product list. I want to render the list of the product. To start with that, I'll start with So, I think we need to declare the variable, then the name, what you want to query on. And after that, in the query, we see we have to make a query on the viewer. After viewer, inside the viewer, I want to make a query on product list. So I'll go to the product list. And inside the product list, I want to render the name of the product. There are certain fields, whichever you want to render, you can just pick it up from there. What I want to render is the name and ID. Oops. And we can just see what data we are getting. So as you see, once we make a query, we are getting all the data on the right-hand side. And here we have the name of the product and the product IDs. So this is how we write a query to make to get whatever data we want to. I have already added this query in my query in my schema, which is this get products. This is the similar one that we just wrote. Viewer, product list, ID, name, and apart from the ID and name, I have also queried for unit price, units in stock, and units on order. Once we query the data, how we are going to use it, I have displayed all my products on the home page. So I have added this code directly on the index.js file right now. We imported this query from the schema folder inside our index.js file. And once we did that, how we are going to use it? We are going to use it with the useQuery hook. UseQuery hook is a React hook that shares GraphQL data with your UI, and we can fetch the data in our application with this hook. So after importing the query into index.js file directly, we are going to use this query. I have already imported this query from Apollo client package. Here, I have declared states loading, error, data, refetch. As I have mentioned that there are already some states over there. So I have used these states here, and using useQuery hook, I have made a query on this get products. Once I get the data, since this is the next application, I'm going to use the next router. So here, once I have received the data, let me console that data for you. So here, as you see, we had queried inside viewer in the product list. I have the data for all the products that I wanted to list on. Name, unit price, unit in stocks, everything, whatever I wanted. After getting this data, what I did, I just displayed that inside the card. I have written a map function over here on line 28. And inside this, I have just displayed all the data, whatever I wanted, apart from this button. We'll talk about it in a while. So name, unit price, units in stock, units on order. Everything that I wanted to display, I have just mapped over this data, and I have displayed it over here. And now, after querying the data, what if I want to make a specific query? For example, I want to see the details of just one product. In that case, variables or arguments come into the picture. Variables is an object that contains all of the variables, whatever we want to pass to our GraphQL query to get the specific set of data. If we need to make a query for a specific data, variable is going to be our friend. And we'll look into that, how variables work. So, for example, when I go to view data, I want to see the data just for this one product. Well, how does that work? In the GraphQL, here, when we were looking at this product, we had product list, which tells us about all the products. It just renders a list of all the product and its fields. But when I want to make a query for a specific product, here in the product, we see that we have to pass a filter. Filter in this case is going to be filter find one product input. So let's write this query now. So if I write a query for just one product now, here we have product, and in this product, we'll have to pass a filter. And rest everything is going to be similar one. I think I have passed incorrect ID. So this is going to be the query for the product, for one single product. Not sure why I'm passing the incorrect query. And in this case, when you run it, you will see that there is only one product here. But if you want to change the ID, like if you want to see the data for a specific product, let's do that. Here in this list, I want to see the data for this Uncle Bob's organic dried pears. So I'll just go to the query variables, and here I'll pass the variable. So it's gonna be and it will render me, since I passed this ID of Uncle Bob's, it's gonna render only that one product. To use this in our application, how we have done is we have already written this query. I have imported it in my product.js file, and here on line number 15, I have queried it like we did for all the products, but here we are also passing the variables. This ID, this variables that we are passing, it's going to be a filter, and we are going to pass ID over here. And using this ID, we are specifying which product data we want to render over here. In the use effect, I have accessed this ID over here and set the states that I wanted to set on. And similarly, like we did in the last one, we have our data over here in the return statement. We have all our data over here that we have fetched using the queries. And once we go there, we can see all our data over there. Now, this is about queries and using variables. Now comes the best part of the GraphQL that I love the most, is mutations. Mutations helps us to mutate the data. Well, it also comes with a keyword mutate, with which we are going to mutate the data. It runs in series after one another, and it updates Apollo cache after mutations. Like after every mutations, it's going to update the Apollo cache directly. How we are going to use it? We are going to use it with the use mutation hook. Use mutation hook is a React hook, like use query. And this is the primary API for executing mutations in an Apollo application. The code structure for using a use mutation hook looks like this, where we are going to import the use mutations from Apollo client and write our query just how we wrote the other queries. Here, we will add, rather than adding the keyword query, we will add keyword mutation, pass what we want to query on, and then just query on that. Then just update the data that we want to mutate. So if we will look at my schema over here, I want to mutate the data. By what I want to do here, first I want to add add a new product. Like if someone wants to add a product, they should be able to add it by going to the add product. Then I want whatever the product I have added over there, I want it to be updated or deleted, because these are the mutations that those are supported in this API. So if I check out the docs over here, here in the mutation list, I can see that I can create product, update, remove, create order, update order, remove order, or update employee. Out of all these today, what we are going to do, we are going to create we are going to create one, update, and remove. So if I look at my schema, I have already added this create product over here. And this says create product. Okay, let's look at the docs. So in the mutations, if I go for create product, here in the create product, I have to pass record. Record should be create one product input. And when I click on that, I can see that create one product input can have these fields. But what I want to do, I want to update the name, unit price, units in stock, and units on order for record. So how we are going to do, once we write these mutations, it will take the record ID and whatever name, unit price, units in stock, and units on order we want to mutate, it will just mutate that data and renders that to us. So how we have done is, in the add.js file, I have imported this query, the create product query that I have written over there, and that then I have accessed it. So here, rather than importing the use query hook, using the use query hook, we have use mutation. Since we are going to mutate the data, we have data loading error states over there. And what I'm going to do, I have a handle submit function which calls the mutate function, and it updates these variables. So in the record, I wanted name, unit price, unit in stock, and units on order to be updated. So I have added that. Once that is done successfully, we will just render back to the home page. So here we have set all the data and access the ID. Here we have sent all the data in the form, and once we click on the submit button, it will call the handle submit function and our data will be mutated. So let's go back to the application, and if I go to the home page and try to add a product, it will add my product in the bottom. So here in the last one, this is the product that we have added, and this is how mutations work to add, this is how we have mutated the data to add it. Now, we can use mutations to mutate the already existing data as well. So if I go here and I want to change the name of this product, I can just simply go and change it. But and for that, we have also added the schema over here. So we looked at the create product. Now, if we go back to our graphical, here in the documentation, we looked at the update product as well. So update product has, it has a similar kind of structure. We have to pass the ID, and then in the record, we have to pass whatever data we want to change. So in the update product, I have passed the ID and record, like they have, like it's mentioned in the arguments. Here we have two arguments, ID and record, that we have passed. And then we have record object here, where we want to pass whatever data we want to mutate. So we have added that data over there and added it in the update.js file. So I just imported this query in the update.js file, accessed all the states here, and similarly, on a handle update, it will update all the data. So once I click the handle update, once I do the handle update function, call the handle update function, what it's gonna do, it's gonna update all the data that I want to be updated in my UI. So here, if I want this to be 100 and 50 and update, it's just gonna update my data. And if I go back now it's updated. Yeah. So similarly, we have remove.js. In the remove.js, again, we have queries, which is for remove product. And in this one, in this filter, we have to pass a filter or a sort. So here we have already passed a filter, which is ID. And with that, imported that query here. And we have used it in the use effect to delete like whatever product we want to remove. We can just call that, and our query will be mutated and our data will be removed from there. So that's how we can mutate the data in GraphQL. All right. So this is about GraphQL, Apollo Client, and React. From my side, if you have any questions, you can find me after the talk, and you can reach out to me on Twitter. This code is on my GitHub as well, so you can find it over there. Thank you.